JRPG is a crap genre name. Recently, Yoshi P, the producer of Final Fantasy XVI, recently talked about the negative connotation and association the term JRPG used to have in the industry. And while recently the mood regarding the term has shifted to more positive connotations, those old wounds still remain. So let's talk about the term JRPG, because honestly, it's a terrible genre name when we get down to it. So let's use Final Fantasy as an example and break down the term JRPG and why I'm not a fan of the term anymore. So let's be a bit reductive and say there's two main gameplay styles of Final Fantasy, turn-based and real-time combat. Again, arguments can be waged about whether or not these are actually the two main genres, but let's just say that it is for now. And let's take two examples, one from each category. Original Final Fantasy VII, and let's also take the remake. Ask most people, at least Western gamers, and most people would probably say that both original Final Fantasy VII and its remake counterpart are classified under the JRPG genre, or at least classification. Now, having that as a base and understanding that, let's go up to someone who is wholly unfamiliar with either game, hypothetically. And if they ask us what genre of game that Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake are, what would they think if we just said JRPG? What information are we actually conveying there? Again, assuming they have no understanding or background knowledge about either of these titles. So what are they really learning from the term JRPG, that they're role-playing games? It's already a vague term with little consensus as to what its actual meaning is. And the only other piece of information they would be able to gather from that is that the game was Japanese in origin. Genre names, at least to me, are meant to convey a quick bite of information to the consumer, so they know the rough framework from which the game should operate from. If I say this game is an FPS, you may not know what the underlying mechanics are, but you know the game is from a first-person perspective, and that you shoot things. That is usable information the consumer can gain from that genre moniker. If I say this game is a platformer, you may need to look up the genre definition, but you would then be able to surmise that, hey, this game is all about maneuvering yourself around various platforms. Again, usable, practical information that is being conveyed to the consumer through that terminology. But the term JRPG and even arguably RPG is so vague in its definition that it's not really that useful of an actual definition. If we want to just be literal with it, RPG stands for role-playing game. You give me any game, and I can argue it's a game in which you play a role. Mario, you play the role of Mario. Zelda, you play the role of Link. Halo, you play the role of Master Chief or the Rookie or Noble Six or Spawn Locke. Elden Ring, you play as the Tarnished, that's your role. Spyro the Dragon, you play as guess who? Spyro. That is the role in which you are playing. It's a term that by itself lacks any distinctive definition and can be applied broadly, depending upon your perspective, but the community has given it some additional context. So if I say RPG, you kind of know the rough framework of what you're getting into. Probably have a leveling up system with XP, maybe able to change your gear, probably have some kind of stat system, probably focused on the story and world overall, and there may be some sort of side questing system. But again, lots of other games from other genres have those things as well. And for those games, we call them RPG-like mechanics. But is it really that helpful of a definition when we get down to it? If I'm playing a Mario game and all of a sudden I grab a Goomba, go first person and start blasting jabronis with whatever the Goomba ate for lunch, would we say that the Mario game has FPS-like mechanics? Or would we say that section was just an FPS game? It's a difficult thing to pin down, ain't it? And the definition, your own definition for what makes a game an RPG sounds different coming from which person you're talking to. Feels like there's a distinction between an RPG and a genre for a game. Because a game can have the framework of an RPG, but still be a fundamentally different genre. RPG also seems to be one of the quote-unquote genres of games that is most paired with other genres. Take Destiny, an FPS MMORPG. And since the definition of RPG is so hard to pin down and changes from person to person you're talking to, should a genre really be like that, broadly speaking? There ain't much debate to be had about whether or not Call of Duty is an FPS game, right? It's a game in a first-person perspective where you shoot things. Not many would argue against Call of Duty being an FPS game, unless someone really wanted to be pedantic and say that since you use a knife, it's an action game. But debating whether or not a game is an RPG or even a JRPG, those arguments can be waged, and since those debates can happen, are either term really all that helpful or beneficial to the consumer at the end of the day? Because to me, that's the most important thing with these genre descriptions, or genre classifications. Or should these terms be retired in favor of more descriptive terminology that's more accurate to what the actual experience of said game is? Because again, let's go back to the Final Fantasy VII versus Final Fantasy VII Remake example. Those are wildly different games on a fundamental level. Some people adore turn-based and want that, and some don't and prefer real-time action. Painting both games with a brush and calling it a JRPG is just kind of lazy, ain't it? Like, when you really think about it, at least turn-based RPG, or ATB-based RPG, real-time action RPG, I can get some kind of meaning from that classification, because they're more strict in terms of their definition. If I told you a game is a turn-based RPG, you could probably get a decent sense as to what the gameplay loop is, right? Kind of like the idea of a shooter, because a shooter, you could argue, falls under a similar issue that RPG has, or JRPG, whereas it's just too broad of a definition by itself. It requires additional classification. Because does a shooter count for a twin-stick shooter? When I said twin-stick shooter, you knew exactly what I was talking about. You knew the perspective, you knew the type of gameplay you had entailed. But if I just said shooter, you could be thinking third-person shooter like Gears of War, or FPS like Halo and Call of Duty, or Doom. Could be twin-stick shooter, could be whatever. Hell, it could be Splatoon. Shooter by itself is too broad of a definition, so we narrow the definition and attach additional nomenclature to it. First-person shooter, twin-stick shooter, third-person shooter. That way we understand the type of game we're getting into when someone says this game is an FPS or a twin-stick shooter, etc. I'd argue the same thing needs to happen for RPG with role-playing games. Turn-based role-playing game, ATB-based RPG, real-time action RPG, these give you at least an additional framework to gather information from and understand what the game actually is. Final Fantasy as a series has incorporated numerous different genres across its games, and to label that all under the broad brush of JRPG feels extremely reductive at its best because the games and just styles of play are so fundamentally different to one another. You can't take Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy XIV, and Final Fantasy 15 or 16, put them together and say these are the same genre of game. They're just not. Take Final Fantasy 16 as an example. Its combat in real-time is real-time and action-oriented, where you swap between various summon forms for different abilities to combo into one another, or for different benefits, whether it be mobility or protection or offense. Compared to one of the ATB games like Final Fantasy 6 or 7, the combat and overall gameplay loop is just completely different. The pacing is different, your thought process is different, the way you encounter various obstacles is different, the way you fight monsters is different, the way those monsters fight you is different. Everything is different. It's a different genre. Heck, one of the largest debates that's perpetually surrounded Final Fantasy is that it's continually moved away from its turn-based roots in favor of the real-time action, and whether or not that move ruined the franchise or didn't. Same debate waged between traditional turn-based or the ATB system. The games aren't the same, and they highlight exactly how unhelpful the term JRPG really is. So not only does the term at least have connotations uncomfortable, to say the least, for many Japanese developers, but the term itself offers no practical value. So I am in favor of adopting new genre definitions for these RPGs moving forward. I don't think RPG as a term needs to be abandoned wholesale, as there is some value associated with the context the gaming community and RPG community has given that term, as it is associated with various mechanics that can be useful to the consumer as a genre definer, or at least classification, or at minimum framework, but I think additional words should be added to specify the genre more directly. Stuff like turn-based or command-based RPG. Someone left that in a comment video a few days ago. I really agreed with it. To signify games in the style of Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy or Pokemon. Party-based could be used as well for games that rely on controlling a party of individuals throughout combat. I think the YouTube channel Jim Sterling mentioned that as well. Real-time combat, or we can even recontextualize the phrase action RPG to refer specifically to games with RPG mechanics that also incorporate a real-time action-based combat system. Stuff like that is far more descriptive and honestly accurate to the games that we are talking about, and I think would be strictly an improvement in the conversation surrounding these games, because they don't all just belong to one overarching genre, because that term that was used, JRPG, is just not helpful in classifying what these games really are. So that's my 2 cents in the whole situation, my argument as to why we should probably move away from terms strictly like JRPG or RPG. So if you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe out there, buddy. Have a great day. Hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload in the future, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on these terms, and what you think should be utilized in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your perspectives. Stay safe out there, buddy. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.